I'll introduce myself. I'm Daniel Geretz. I am a board certified chaplain, and I'm also a supervisor educator candidate. My training supervisor is, the name says Krista, but it's not Krista, it's Ted Taylor.
I'll rename myself.
May have met or may not have met. Ted was also my supervisor for my last unit of CPE. I work as a chaplain that visits Jewish patients at Morristown Medical Center in Morristown, New Jersey. And I do that 2 days a week. And then I have other things that I do that are less chaplaincy related or less obviously chaplaincy related the rest of the week. I'm an ordained Orthodox rabbi. Actually have 2 ordinations. There's a long story behind that. And so some people say that I'm the hospital rabbi for Morristown Medical Center. And actually, because chaplain is a term that has Christian origins, sometimes when I introduce myself to my patients as a chaplain, they say, "Oh, but I'm Jewish," right? Because chaplain implies that I wouldn't be Jewish. And I say, "Well, I'm Jewish too." And sometimes we can talk about what a Jewish chaplain does. Other times people don't understand, particularly older people. And if there's another family member there, they'll say, "He's the rabbi." And they say, "Oh, okay, now I get why you're here." Although rabbis and chaplains serve in different functions. 2 other bookkeeping or accounting or housekeeping, I guess, housekeeping things that I want to attend to. And that is, first of all, I want to thank Krista in her absence for all the work that she's done to get things organized and also to invite me to speak to you. And I also want to thank Dallas Spiked. I came over from a different chaplaincy organization, and the way that PPEI was conceived, construed, and is being run is a real credit to Dallas. I really, really appreciate the accountability and the transparency, which is something that I did not have that experience previously. So I'm really, really appreciative and really, really impressed with the organization. And I pledge my support to the organization. We'll get into why I'm here in New Jersey as opposed to there in Nashville in a minute. I want to preface by saying that because when we get into the presentation, you might think otherwise, and I want to put out in front that I'm a big fan of CPEI. I fully support the organization, and it's really hard for me this week to be here in person. It's supposed to be there and chill with the people who are there in person. So I'm going to share a slide deck that I put together, and we're going to go for about 45 minutes or 40 minutes, and then we'll have question and answer. We're going to be done by 3 p.m. your time. I hope. Okay. So the first slide is just the title, Caring for Members of Religious Minorities. And my name is Rabbi Daniel Geretz, BCC, SEC. And my email is at the bottom. Krista will be giving out this in a PDF format after the end of the presentation. So if you want to reach out to me, if you can't find me, my email address is right on the first slide. So I have a couple of questions for you. I celebrated Yom Kippur this past Saturday. And for everyone else here, except for Ted, anybody want to hazard a guess, or does anybody know what Jewish holiday will I be celebrating next? Anybody know? Don't be shy. Okay.
It involves the outdoors. I'll give hints.
Huh? It involves what?
The outdoors.
Yeah, I got a hint. I got a hint here.
There you go.
This is what I did yesterday. Does anybody know what I'm doing here? Anybody? There is a right answer, I'm not going to beat you up if you get it wrong. So the holiday that I'm going to be celebrating next is actually this Wednesday night. The holiday is Sukkot or Sukkot. Those of you who might be familiar with the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, it is the festival of ingathering, the fall holiday, which involves sitting in huts and taking the 4 species. It's actually in the 5 books of Moses in a couple of places, if you go look for it. This month, for me, has got 4 different holidays. Rosh Hashanah was at the beginning of October, and then there was Yom Kippur, which was this past Saturday, and then there's actually 2 holidays back to back. I am taking 6 personal days off this month to celebrate my holiday. A Thursday, Friday at the beginning of the month, this Thursday and Friday, and then next Thursday and Friday. I have 6 days of PTO. My kiddo's school, which I'm sitting outside of here, because I got to pick him up in about 50 minutes, gives days off. So the Wednesday before Rosh Hashanah, he didn't have school. Last Friday, he didn't have school. He doesn't have school this Wednesday. He doesn't have school all next week. And I have to, luckily now he's 12. So, and my wife works close to the house. So we can leave him home by himself. But when he was younger, it's like one of us has got to work from home or take more personal time off. So this month is really, really, really challenging. Chock full of holidays. And part of the reason that I'm not there in Nashville, I really, really wanted to. And I worked hard to try to figure out how late on Sunday can I get there? How early on Tuesday can I leave? How's my wife going to go grocery shopping and handle all the preparations at home, including building the sukkah, building the hut, going to buy the palm frond and the citron and the other things. And it just wasn't possible. I thought 2 weeks ago it might still be possible. Then my kiddo came down with pneumonia. He was out of school, and it just didn't happen. So it's really disappointing to me, and it's a grief for me that this is the first gathering of CPI, an organization which I really support and which I really love, and that I couldn't be there physically in person with everyone else who's in Nashville, just because of scheduling. And if this was next month, then it wouldn't be an issue because my holidays would be over and I wouldn't have this craziness. But this month I have this craziness. One other thing which I didn't mention, which I told Ted and which I told Krista, the holidays, I'm not going to make an assumption. I see that the Modermans have a cross on the wall behind them, so I'm assuming that they're from some sort of a Christian faith tradition. I don't know about Ruth. I don't know about Ramona. And I know Ted is a Quaker. But Christmas, Easter, they're a big deal. You make a holiday dinner. I've made Thanksgiving like 3 or 4 times already, and I'm going to be making Thanksgiving another 3 or 4 times by the end of this month. If you can imagine, it's this month is just crazy. I am not the rabbi of a synagogue. So I went to the synagogue that I attend, and I spoke to the rabbi last night. I had sent him an email last week about a donation I wanted to make to the synagogue. I said, "Did you get my email?" And he looked at me like a deer in the headlights, because he had a bunch of sermons he had to prepare for Rosh Hashanah, a bunch of sermons for Yom Kippur, more sermons for the holiday coming up. His life is probably even crazier than mine. No, maybe he got my email. He didn't even have time to read it. So just so that you have an appreciation of what it is like at this time of year. And that is the introduction to the presentation. Extra credit question. What other religious holiday was observed this past Saturday? Anybody know? Today's Columbus Day. That's not a religious holiday. Or it might be Indigenous Peoples Day, depending on where you are.
Or if,
Ted, you know?
if you're an Italian in New Jersey, it might be a religious holiday. I don't know.
Maybe. That's not what I'm thinking of. And by the way, I didn't know this. I happened to be in the hospital last Friday. I was waiting in the elevator lobby for an elevator, and there was a physician with a resident, and he was telling the resident about his holiday and what it's like. And I realized, oh, it's a Hindu holiday. I wonder what holiday that is. So I went and I looked on the internet, and it's a holiday called Vijay Dashami or Dasahra or Dashara. And I just put this up so you can look at it and see what's really interesting here, at least to me. And if you're familiar with the Old Testament, how the holidays are enumerated, they're not on the Gregorian calendar that we use, they're on actually a lunisolar calendar. But they say the holiday of the 7th month and the holiday of the 1st month. Look at this. This holiday is actually the 10th day of the month of Ashvan, the 7th in the Hindu lunisolar calendar. Yom Kippur is the 10th day of the 7th month in a lunisolar calendar. So it means that in most years, that this Hindu holiday is going to fall out on Yom Kippur, not necessarily all years, because the lunisolar calendar needs a couple of months added here and there for adjustment. And they might not, the rules for when to adjust the calendar to be in sync with the secular calendar may or may not match up. Or maybe they're like the Muslim calendar and they don't adjust. Those of you who are familiar with Islam may realize that the Islamic holy days rotate around the calendar. So Ramadan, it sometimes may be a summer holiday. Later on, it may move to the spring, then earlier even to the winter. And over a course of 30 or 40 years, it can occur once a year in each different season of the year. This is just interesting. There's a lot of information out there. I am by no means an expert on this. The reason I'm giving this presentation is not to share expertise or wisdom about any particular religion. I do have a little knowledge of my own sometimes, but just to give people an idea of how bewildering or how overwhelming or how diverse the various different faith traditions are, and how even if you think you know everything, you don't. You don't know everything about every faith tradition, let alone your own faith tradition. What's my next slide? So I wanted to share what it's like to be a member of a minority faith tradition. And these are just a couple of thoughts that came to mind. This is not an exhaustive list. Usually, we know a lot more about the majority religion than members of the majority religion know about our religion. So like, I know that Sukkot is this week. The informal poll that we did at the beginning of the presentation, at least the people in this room didn't know what holiday I was going to be celebrating later on this week. I know that Halloween is at the end of October. I know that Christmas is December 25th. I know when Easter is. When I go to the grocery store during the season, they play Christmas music. So I know a lot of Christmas music. I wonder, Ted might know, like the songs that we sing at the Passover Seder, like Mani Shtana or Chad Gadya. Y'all ever heard it? Maybe, maybe not. So like there's an uneven amount of knowledge about minority religions. You know, if you're in South Dakota and I'm just picking someplace at random. I'm not picking on South Dakota necessarily. And you're doing CPE. The chances that you're going to run across an Orthodox Jew are like close to zero. In South Dakota, it is possible, well, maybe in Sioux Falls or in one or two other cities, there might still be a small Jewish community. But out elsewhere in South Dakota, it's hard to have an appreciation for minority faith traditions just because you don't have any experience ministering to those people. And like I'm not, you can't manufacture something. The idea here is to be sensitive to, there's a lot out there that I don't know about. Like the Hindu holiday that I mentioned, I didn't know about that. And my ex-wife's brother-in-law is Hindu.
Hmm.
So I was exposed. I spent a month in India. I was exposed to various aspects of Hindu religion, but that doesn't make me in any way, shape, or form an expert on it. If you went to Israel, and I had the privilege of being in Israel about 8 years ago, one of my sons wanted to celebrate his bar mitzvah in Israel. It was right before Passover. If you go into a grocery store in Israel before Passover, then you'll hear Passover. Right? And if you go into a store during this time of year, you're probably going to hear Sukkot music. After that, next month in November or December, you're going to hear Hanukkah music. You're not going to hear Christmas music.
So, Danny, can I just make a funny comment? Because my husband Kevin and I
Sure.
joke this all the time. So one of our favorite Christmas TV specials is Pee-wee's Playhouse Christmas special back in the 80s. But there's one of the characters is Miss Renee, who is the Jewish character. So she comes up and says, now boys and girls, is the time for the Jewish part of the show. And they start singing the dreidel song. So it's just like all of a sudden it's this full Christmas blowout, but they'll have a little Jewish section for it. Which is, I mean, it's just over the top because it's just a joke in a way.
It is, and that leads into the second. It leads to the second point, which is it's easy to be overlooked and forgotten. When CPEI scheduled the conference, I emailed Krista and I said, did you not know? She said, well, but it's not on Rosh Hashanah or on Yom Kippur. I said, yeah, but but there's a lot of other holidays there. This is a really, having this conference would be the equivalent of having it the week before Easter, Holy Week, within the Christian traditions. So I know that Easter, but it's not Easter. Yeah, but it's Holy Week. It's the week before Easter. So it's when you don't have a lot of information, it's easy to make assumptions or to be overlooked and forgotten. I'm going to share a story. I am on an interfaith committee here in the state of New Jersey, although I'm not sure that we're still active because I haven't seen any emails for a while. I think the pandemic really made it hard for us to get together. Before the pandemic, we had a meeting in the administrative offices of the Archdiocese of Newark, where John Kay works. So a bunch of us got together and we were putting together a statement. I think we were encouraging the state government to reevaluate the rules about people who are convicted felons not being able to vote in elections. I don't remember exactly what the issue was. And we drafted this statement, and there were, a lot of biblical verses quoted. There were Muslims, there were Jews, there were Christians in the room, Catholics and Protestants, and a lot of quotation from the Old Testament / Hebrew Bible. I noticed that there was a Sikh in the corner And at a certain point, I spoke up and I said, I wonder if our statement can also include scripture from the Sikh tradition, because Sikhs have different holy scripture. They don't have like the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. They have their own, and so we incorporated it.
Mhm.
But until I opened my mouth and said, "Hey, what about other traditions to honor the Sikh who's in the room?" I don't know that it would have happened. I don't know that anybody else noticed. And arguably, like in that room, Sikh, the Sikh faith tradition was the minority religion compared to the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims in the room. Pressure to conform with majority religion. You know, if you're a kid growing up, and if you're in a Jewish day school, it's a little bit different because then you're going to school with Jewish kids, but you're still exposed to the mass media. But if you're a Jewish kid going to public school and all your friends are talking about what we're going to do for Christmas and the presents we're going to get, then it's really hard not to conform with those values, and to feel bad that, like, you know, well, why do we have to be, why do we have to have a different faith tradition? Why do we have to have these other celebrations? Hanukkah, which more or less coincides with Christmas, although it's on a lunar calendar, so it floats back and forth between the end of November and the beginning of January, is not traditionally a holiday for gift giving. It became a holiday for gift giving primarily because of the pressure to import the ethos of gift giving on Christmas. And there are many other ways. It's hard. Like, you know, if you work for a company that gives 15 or 20 days of paid time off, and you gotta use up to 12 or 13 of those days of paid time off for the Jewish holidays when they don't occur on weekend, then it gives you very few days to take for a vacation to Disneyland or to go to Yellowstone National Park or wherever you want to go on your vacation to go to Italy. And it's hard, right, in the United States to conform to the majority religion. In Israel, all the schools are out on Passover. All the schools are out this next week. And, you know, families all have vacation time around the Jewish holidays. If you have a non-Jewish holiday that you're observing, and I really don't know how Islamic holidays are treated. Probably within their communities they are carved out. But, like, you know, if the majority religion is Judaism in the area where you live, it's hard, right, if you're not Jewish, to carve out time for your own holidays and to deal with the inconvenience of the government being closed because it's Rosh Hashanah, or the post office is closed because it's Rosh Hashanah, or it's Sukkot or whatever. The last one is, due to smaller numbers, diversity within faith tradition is flattened or lost. I say I'm Jewish, and you may meet somebody else who's Jewish, doesn't mean we're the same. It's not exactly an apt comparison, but if you think about Horton Hears a Who, people here familiar with Dr. Seuss's Horton Hears a Who, right? So on a little dust speck, there's an entire world. How can it be that on a little dust speck, right, there's an entire world? It's a tiny little dust speck. Judaism is 1%, maybe, of the population in the United States. So how can it be that 1% has such diversity? But we do. We have our own internal struggles, our own internal arguments, our own internal doctrinal debates, you know, pro-Israel, anti-Israel, people that are very, very traditional, still living in the 17th and 18th century, people that say, we have to live in the 21st century. We have all that. We don't agree on anything yet. And I put this together because just so that you can see, people here familiar with Epic for charting? I know Ted is.
Yeah.
Other people familiar with Epic? Look at this.
I
If
am.
if I'm from a Christian faith tradition, I got Baptist, I got Catholic, I don't even know what chapel is. Christian, Christian myth, don't know what that is either. Christian Scientist, Church of Brethren, Church of Christ, and this is just like on the drop down, right? All the Jewish patients, regardless of whether they're Orthodox, conservative, Reformed, post-denominational, Reconstructionist, secular humanist, they all get categorized as Jewish. When I go visit patients, I got, well, the truth is, whenever you go visit patients, whatever it says the faith tradition doesn't really mean anything. If Catholic might give you very rough idea of the outlines, you got to go talk to the patient and find out, what's going on, what's your experience been like within your faith tradition. But in Epic, at least this version of Epic, Jewish is just there as a catch-all for a bunch of different movements within the Jewish tradition, and I can't make any assumption. I can't make any assumption about what Jewish means when I visit Jewish patients. Jewish really means that somebody, yeah, that's what it means. You have to find out, what your experience is like. What's important to you? Are you culturally Jewish? Do you find that the services are meaningful? Do you even go to services? What's your experience been? I'm going to stop here for a minute just to hear if there's any questions, comments.
Yeah, so I'm curious, as a supervisor, how do you see this, not just, with scheduling conferences and things like this? Obviously, this could have been better planned. But how do you see that in affecting the way that you do the scheduling for our courses?
Well, as you know, it's been a challenge. I am aware of what my calendar is, and sometimes we've had to work around the calendar depending on what night of the week we're meeting. If there's a holiday that conflicts, then we would have to move one of the seminars to a different night, or we might have to skip a week and make it up elsewhere. The other thing, and I don't know how to go back to the previous slide, is I really appreciate being able to train where I train doing CPE, and I really appreciated my site supervisor when I was doing CPE. Ted knows Reverend Tom Craig. When I started doing CPE, I said, so I'm going to visit Jewish patients. And he said, no, you're not. You're going to visit Protestant patients. So I visited very few Jewish patients in my CPE experience. I visited Protestant patients primarily, and that made for a really awesome CPE experience for me because I was way outside my comfort zone. I pray for each of you, Jewish patients, or many patients from minority faith traditions, Hindu, Sikh, and there's a bunch of minority Buddhists, that you have an opportunity to visit patients that are way outside your comfort zone, because those are really great learning opportunities. In a country like the United States, where the majority faith tradition is some form of Christianity, it's really easy not to have the experience of ministering to people who are way, way different. From my perspective, and I'm going to share a story about Dwight Sweezy, who Ted knows. So we were at one of these, if you were at the presentation earlier today where Ted mentioned something about ECTS, these seminars where we got together and we present cases. I was one of these, and they had a supervisor assigned to my small group. And I brought a case, and Dwight Sweezy was the supervisor and was talking, I think must have been doing my third or fourth unit of CPE. I was talking about the hospital where I was training. And I said, for the chaplain interns, they categorize patients into three groups. They have Jewish patients, they have Catholic patients, and they have other patients. And that's what they do. They have three reports that they produce, and they give the lists to the chaplain interns to round. And Dwight, afterwards, he said, you really pushed my button, because I'm a Protestant and I don't consider my religion to be other. Why all of a sudden? Jewish patients, Catholic patients, and other. It's Protestants, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, anything that doesn't fall into those two categories goes into other. And he was upset and hurt by that. So, it's always interesting to see, like, what it's like when other people have the same experience that I've had. But I do.
So your thing is uncomfortable to become an other.
Pardon?
It can be uncomfortable to be seen as an other.
Yeah, it can. Yep. And that's actually a really awesome experience if you have an opportunity to have that experience and to be able to reflect on it afterwards. It's a good growth experience, and I bless you all with the opportunity to have those sorts of experiences, because they aside from being outside your comfort zone and being an opportunity to reflect, they really, in the long run, help you have a much deeper appreciation for you. I will say a lot of Orthodox seminaries, the seminary that I was ordained with demanded that I do 1 unit of clinical pastoral education. A lot of the more Orthodox seminaries won't make that demand because they're concerned that their students might come into contact with people from other faith traditions, like Christians and Muslims. And that doesn't make any sense to me, because I think that done properly, CP is an opportunity both to be able to see the other and also to deepen your relationship with your own faith tradition. And I think they're missing out. But I don't run the railroad. I don't run the railroad. I only work here. So. Let's see what else we have here. So if I'm going to sum up this section of the presentation, and then I'm going to move briefly on to another section of the presentation. There's this really awesome article that I encourage you to read called Prayers That Hurt. It's actually up on the internet, and I provide the link there. And when you get the PDF, you can go look at this. And he says, this is the author, Rabbi Arnold Resnikoff, writing. He was a military chaplain, and he writes about his experience with interfaith and interfaith prayer. And particularly an incident where the interfaith prayer included references to Jesus, and he was uncomfortable. A story from rabbinical tradition tells of two longtime friends. "Do you love me?" one asks the other. "Of course," his friend responds. "Do you know what hurts me?" "No, what hurts?" "How can you say you love me if you don't know what hurts me?" So Rabbi Resnikoff, when somebody prayed in Jesus' name, and Jews, by and large, Jews don't believe in the divinity of Jesus as the Lord and Savior, the same way that the Christian faith tradition does. Some Jews might say that that is praying in the name of a false god. So one needs to be careful to try to avoid hurting other people. And it's inevitable that you're going to hurt other people. And so when you know what hurts other people, then you do your best to make amends, to apologize, and say, teach me so that I don't keep on hurting you. I don't know, going down the room. I don't know what it's like to be gay. That does not absolve me from the responsibility to learn what hurt people who are gay and to do my best to avoid hurting them. I don't know what it's like to be. I'm guessing that modernists are some sort of Protestant Christian tradition. Protestants or Catholics?
Protestant.
Yeah. I don't know what it's like to be a Protestant in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Still, the responsibility for me is to do my best not to hurt you. And because I'm a human being, I may end up hurting you, to learn to try not to do it again. Ruth, I don't know what's like to be a woman of color, wherever you are and whatever your faith tradition is. But that doesn't absolve me from the responsibility to learn how not to hurt you. And the same is true for Ramona. I want to move on to one other topic, and I'm going to just whiz through this. This is something new for me, and I'm sharing this more so that you're exposed to the idea. I went to a online conference organized by another chaplaincy organization with which I'm affiliated, NHAC Neshama, Association of Jewish Chaplains. It is an APC affiliated organization. So I'm not a board certified member with them, but I'm still a member of NHAC. They did an online conference, and one of my colleagues presented on ministering to Orthodox Jewish patients in his hospital, which is New York Presbyterian. And was he presented material that I had never thought of. And when we get to that, I will tell you how it is that I had never thought of it. I'd never had that perspective. And I really appreciate the perspective that he shared. I'm going to share some of that with you. So intergenerational trauma is just trauma that's passed from a trauma survivor to their descendants. It can be referred to as transgenerational or multi-generational trauma. I put this together quickly. I realize the attribution for all of this is on the next page. I apologize. I'll fix it before I send out the PDF. People experiencing intergenerational trauma may experience symptoms, reaction, right, by the trauma experienced by previous generations. I didn't put the attribution on this slide either. I will get the attribution and I'll put it here. I just wanted to move this so I can read this. If you take a look, one of the intergenerational trauma that's been documented descendants of refugees, residential schools, and Holocaust survivors, demonstrating this type of trauma impact populations for generations after a collective traumatic event has occurred. And he went on to speak about Holocaust trauma. Actually, this is, oh, phooey. How do I go back here? Okay. This was a presentation by Rabbi Levi Mastrangelo and Shoshana Tromka, both of New York Presbyterian. And I asked him for his presentation afterwards, and I recapitulated a couple of the slides just so you have an idea. What's interesting about this, and we can take a look at this in a minute, what's interesting about this is I didn't have this experience and I never thought about it this way. My dad's parents came to the United States in 1918. My dad was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and very few members of his family actually experienced the Holocaust. He had two aunts in Poland who he never met, who did die in the German Holocaust during World War II. But other than that, no other members of his immediate family were affected by the Holocaust the same way that people lived through it, or that are related to people that lived through it. My mom, her parents were in Lima, Peru from the early 20th century. She grew up in Lima, Peru, and moved to Israel in the late 1940s. So her family also didn't live through the Holocaust. So I'm not actually somebody who's experienced any intergenerational from the German Holocaust. Is something that was on my agenda, never thought about it that way until this individual or these two individuals made this presentation. I said, wow, it blew my mind. I didn't think about it that way. A lot of the behaviors that they see, or a lot of the things that they have to cope with as chaplains, which I also have to cope with because I also serve a couple of Orthodox Jewish communities, are driven by intergenerational trauma from the Holocaust. So just, the German excuse narrative, I was only following orders. Imagine a nurse comes in and says, the doctor said you need to have this. And it's like, well, but I don't want it. Yeah, but the doctor says, right? Nurse is like, I'm only following orders. The doctor ordered this. I'm doing what the doctor told me to do. Internalized truths. Institutional process is not inherently moral. We like to think about if we work in a hospital or we work in another facility as being an inherently moral organization. There's a lot of distrust of institutions as inherently moral because they're not. People have attitudes. If you made me suffer, you need to be accountable. The institution needs to be accountable. So these are attitudes sometimes that people will run into. I think under certain circumstances, individuals or institutions need to be held accountable, but the bar for which they must be held accountable is probably higher than the bar for these people who are suffering intergenerational trauma, where the measure of suffering that the individual experienced is by a different metric than somebody who's not experienced intergenerational trauma. There are no answers here. These are just issues to be aware of. Other ways that medical mistrust may show up: institutional history and culture. If you think about New York, or even the city where I grew up, Minneapolis, Minnesota, there's a Mount Sinai Hospital. The reason that there's a Mount Sinai Hospital is because there needed to be a hospital which would hire Jewish doctors, because other hospitals where the attitudes were more anti-Semitic, like if you were a Jewish doctor and you wanted to work there, you might not be able to work there. Up until later in the 20th century, colleges had quotas for college students, Jewish college students. Medical schools had quotas for Jewish medical students. If you were a Jew who wanted to go into medicine and you ran up against a quota, you might not be able to get into a medical school. Sometimes it's, if you're dealing with an Orthodox Jew and you haven't seen something before, it doesn't fit that we haven't seen this before, but we don't do this. Case in point, I have in my hospital, really, really excellent as far as dealing with this. We have a volunteer who comes to our hospital on Rosh Hashanah. People here know that we blow a ram's horn on Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so we blow a ram's horn on Rosh Hashanah. If you're in a hospital like you have a good mitigating reason not to be in synagogue listening to it, but it's also a cultural thing. And it's like if you've gone to synagogue every year for 50 or 60 years and heard it, it's just not Rosh Hashanah without having that experience. Thankfully, we have a volunteer who walks 2 miles each way, both days of Rosh Hashanah, to blow a ram's horn for our patients.
Nice.
And the rule was we're going to give him the list that we give to our volunteers. In our hospital, volunteers are not allowed to visit patients who are on any sort of isolation precautions. Standard precautions are fine. The minute you need a glove gown or a mask, forget it. You're as a volunteer, you're not going to visit the patient. I had a patient in the ICU. He's coping with a lot. Had a palliative care consult. Things do not look good. Really wanted to hear. Really wanted to hear the shofar. And I was able to meet with the unit manager and find a way that even though he's volunteering, he can't visit. Oh, he's on isolation infection. Can't visit an isolation infection patient. He was able to hear the shofar both days. And my hospital was really good. It wasn't, we don't do that here, look at the volunteer policy. It was more like, we haven't dealt with this before. Let's put our heads together and figure out a way that we can make it happen because it's really important for this patient. But not all hospitals are like that. And just so that you're aware. Clinician experience, patient family requests for special treatment, or colleagues ask us to take difficult Jewish families. Right? Oh, there's another difficult Jewish family. You're the Jewish chaplain. You go visit them. That is all. So I will open the floor up for questions, comments.
Danny, I'm really glad you did this. I appreciate you sharing your experience. And I don't know if any of you all were at the opening this morning. So it was really interesting, Danny. There was a prayer that hurt me. The opening prayer was prayed in Christ's name, which I have a different definition of Christ as a Quaker that I think a lot of my Christian compadres might have. And I know it's not what non-Christian people would ever use that language anyway. So it's just like, do we really need to do that this morning? And I talked to a few people about that. But the other thing that was up there was we looked at our vision and mission statement as an organization and included in a highlighted place inclusivity, inclusion as one of our as high goals as an organization. I'm not sure we're doing so well with that. And someone actually raised the point: how are we going to, focus on that? Who does that?
I'll share, and this is personal, just because the word inclusion is an interesting word. For about 5 or 6 years, so I'll preface it by saying Orthodox Judaism is not an egalitarian faith tradition. We struggle with women's roles in rich leadership, sometimes in rich leadership. My wife is an Orthodox rabbi. She is probably one of maybe 2 or 3 dozen ordained Orthodox women in the United States and in North America. And the vast majority of the Orthodox world does not recognize her ordination because we struggle with the role of women. For 5 or 6 years, I ran, I guess I'll call it an experimental service. I found a responsum which I considered to allow me to have a service which gave more opportunities for women to be in ritual leadership. We ran this about once a month in various different houses, eventually ended up running it in my basement. And we had actually had holiday services for 5 or 6 years. It was a really great learning experience for me. Once or twice over the course of that, I was able to stand back and say, like, this was really awesome. Interestingly, the philosophy that I used was not inclusion, not we need to include women, but using the Jewish legal principle of hamotzi michavero alav haraya. If you're going to take something away from somebody, then the burden of proof is on you to say it's justified. This is a term that's usually applied in civil law. Somebody is, making a claim against somebody, like we're going to take the land away from somebody, we're going to take the money away from somebody. The burden of proof is on the claimant. It's not on the defense, it's on the plaintiff. If a woman comes and says, I'd like to be engaged in ritual leadership, then the burden of proof is not on her to show that she is worthy. The burden of proof is on the people who are holding the gates shut to say, we have a good reason to exclude you. So I don't like the term inclusion. I like the term non-exclusion. We're not going to gratuitously exclude people unless we have a good reason to do so. Making that harmonized with Jewish doctrine is a challenge. It's because it's not only doctrine, there are social engineering aspects or tradition aspects. You can't wholesale make changes because people will just leave and say, okay, we're not going to do this anymore. We'll do something else and we'll do what we want to do. So these things are difficult. But to the point, and going back to Pee Wee Herman, right? You can say having the one Hanukkah song was inclusion. Thinking about how can we do this entire program, honor the idea of Christmas, and not be so odious that Jews won't want to participate, would be non-exclusion.
So Daniel, what was the phrase that you used with inclusion, the word before that? That you said you like to use that phrase instead?
Non-exclusion.
Non-exclusion.
Non-exclusion or non-gratuitous exclusion.
Okay, thank you.
It can be exclusion, and it can be, like not gratuitous exclusion.
There's no good English word, is there?
You can't ride the roller coaster because you're only 36 inches tall and it's not safe for you to ride the roller coaster. You're being excluded, but it's not gratuitous. You can't ride the roller coaster because we don't like the color of your hair or the color of your skin. Yeah, that's gratuitous exclusion.
Let me ask you guys, since you have an interest in being here, and not to put anyone on the spot, but I already wrote your names down. Except Amy, I don't know who the partner you have behind you is, so I don't have a name there.
It's my husband, John, and he's a chaplain as well. So.
Okay, John, same last name?
Yes, Moderman.
So that's the reason I'm writing these down is that I chair our ethics committee. And I'm wondering if this is a point in time to expand the ethics committee's work into dealing with issues around inclusivity, exclusivity, however we find a good word to contain that. But since you guys are interested, I might be emailing you later to see if you'd want to serve on the committee. Be careful what seminars you ever show up for, because then you show an interest. I don't know what this would look like, but I just you might be hearing from me in the next couple of weeks, because I think there is a need here as CPI expands to make sure we don't do stupid things like holding a conference in October. It's just always filled with pitfalls for anyone who celebrates Jewish holidays. Not to hold it around Easter week, because that's not going to work for most of us either. To look at our actual academic calendars and see how do we find wiggle room for our students and our supervisors to work around holidays. And we are a theological organization, so we need to be aware, I think, not just of racial and cultural issues, but of our holidays that we celebrate, these holy days. So anyway, that's my soapbox.
It's hard though. You have a multi-faith calendar in your office because I've been there and I've seen it. And we picked up for Morristown and for Coupam and Barnabas a couple, and it's about the time of year I got to order another one.
Mhm.
But if you look at all the different holidays that there are, right, don't ever schedule anything.
Right, you can't, I mean,
So-
so, you know, it's just how to be as inclusive as possible and not, and then if you have to be exclusive, then make it non-gratuitous. I mean, just try to, those are things I think we as an organization need to be more aware of. We can do better.
Well, I thank you all for listening to me go on about whatever it was that I spoke about for the past hour or so. I look forward to hearing from all of you again in the future, and hopefully at some point being able to meet all of you. I pray that God bless your work, and God give you opportunities for growth and for satisfaction in your work.
Thanks, Danny, and have a great holiday this week. May it not rain. May it not rain.
Yeah, may it not rain. All right.
Good to
Thank
see
you. Thank you.
Okay, everyone.